You ever sit there, staring at your phone, reading the same message over and over again, wondering what changed? Because everything was fine. The conversation was flowing. There was energy. There was interest. And then, nothing. Silence. No reply, no explanation, just distance. And the worst part? It doesn't even feel like a clear rejection. It feels confusing. Like something is there, but you can't quite figure out what it is. So your mind starts filling in the gaps. Did I say something wrong? Did I come on too strong? Is she talking to someone else? And before you even realize it, you've created a whole story in your head. But what if that story isn't true? What if the silence you're experiencing doesn't mean what you think it means? Because here's something most people don't talk about. When a woman ignores you, it's not always a lack of interest. Sometimes it's something deeper. Sometimes it's psychological. And if you don't understand what's actually happening beneath the surface, you'll react in a way that completely ruins your chances, without even realizing it. Section 1. The misinterpretation. Let's start with the biggest mistake people make. They assume that attention equals interest, and silence equals rejection. But human behavior doesn't work that simply. Attraction isn't always expressed directly. In fact, a lot of the time, it's hidden. Not intentionally, but subconsciously. Because when emotions get involved, people don't always act logically. They act defensively. Imagine this. You meet someone, and there's a natural connection. You're not forcing conversation, it just flows. There's laughter, eye contact, that subtle feeling that something is building. And then later, you reach out, and the response? Cold, delayed, minimal. Now, from your perspective, that feels like a contradiction. But from her perspective, something else might be happening entirely. Section 2. When feelings create distance. Sometimes, when someone starts to feel something real, they don't move closer. They pull back. Not because they don't want it, but because they do. And that feeling? It introduces risk, vulnerability, uncertainty. So instead of leaning into that emotion, they create space. Space to think, space to process, space to regain control. And if you've ever felt something strong for someone, you've probably experienced this yourself. That moment where you pause, not because you're uninterested, but because you're unsure what to do with what you're feeling. Section 3. The observation phase. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. When communication slows down, observation often increases. She might not be replying as quickly, but that doesn't mean she's not paying attention. In fact, she might be watching more closely than before. Not in an obvious way, but subtly. Noticing how you behave, how you respond to space, how you carry yourself when things aren't going your way. Because silence reveals something words can't. Your default behavior. Do you become reactive? Do you chase? Do you try to fix the situation? Or do you remain steady, calm, grounded? That response tells a story, and most people don't even realize they're being evaluated in that moment. Section 4. When it's not that deep. Now, let's bring balance into this. Because not every situation is psychological. Sometimes, she's just not that invested. Not yet, at least. And that's something people struggle to accept, because we tend to personalize everything. If someone doesn't respond, we assume it's about us. But in reality, people have their own lives, their own priorities, their own distractions, their own emotional timelines. And sometimes, you're just not at the top of that list. And that's okay. Because attraction isn't always immediate. Sometimes it builds slowly. Sometimes it never builds at all. And part of understanding this dynamic is learning not to force meaning onto every action. Section 5. The need for direction. There's another layer to this that most people overlook. Sometimes, the interaction simply lacks direction. You're talking, you're engaging, but nothing is progressing. No movement, no intention, no shift. And eventually, that creates stagnation. And when something feels stagnant, interest starts to fade. Not because the connection isn't there, but because it's not going anywhere. You've probably experienced this. A conversation that starts strong but slowly becomes repetitive, predictable, safe, but not exciting. And over time, that energy drops. Section 6. The role of emotion. Attraction thrives on emotional variation, curiosity, uncertainty, engagement. When everything becomes too predictable, the emotional pull disappears. And when that happens, attention follows. So sometimes being ignored isn't about rejection, it's about lost stimulation. Section 7. Your response matters most. Now here's the part that changes everything. What you do after she pulls back matters more than why she did it. Because this is where most people lose control. They react, they chase, they over-explain, they try to regain attention. But that reaction often creates the exact outcome they were trying to avoid. Because when you react emotionally, you communicate something without saying it. Dependence. And dependence kills attraction. Section 8. The correct approach. So what does the right response look like? It's simple, but not easy. You give space, not as a strategy, but as a mindset. You don't rush to fill silence. You don't force interaction. You allow things to unfold naturally. And in that space, something important happens. Clarity. Because patterns start to reveal themselves. Final section. Seeing clearly. One delayed reply means nothing, but consistent behavior? That tells the truth. And once you start focusing on patterns instead of moments, you stop overreacting and start understanding. At the end of the day, being ignored isn't always rejection. Sometimes it's hesitation. Sometimes it's emotion. Sometimes it's timing. And sometimes it's exactly what it looks like. But the difference is in how you interpret it, and more importantly, how you respond to it. Because that response determines everything that comes next. If you've been misreading silence this whole time, now you see it differently. And once you see it, you don't go back. I'll see you in the next one.